The committee says Penn State belongs in the college football playoff, and so do the analytics.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Seyko. I am your host of the show, and help me welcome him back. College football analyst over at Pro Football Focus. He is the co-host of PFF's college football show. Max Chadwick is joining us to talk Penn State's college football playoff outlook and why the numbers say that they're a legitimate college football playoff team. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, Max, the numbers back up Penn State as a legitimate college football playoff team. We'll talk about Penn State versus Minnesota as well to get the numbers there. But you and I agree, and so do the numbers, that Penn State is solidly in the college football playoff conversation. They're not a fringe contender. They're not on the outside looking in. They are at the top when you think of the elite teams that are going into the postseason.
Yeah, definitely. I think as long as Penn State wins their last two games against Minnesota and Maryland, they'll most likely be hosting a playoff game, honestly, a first-round playoff game. Now, if they lose either of those two games, I think they're probably going to be on the outside looking in and not making the college football playoff at all. I don't think a 10-2 Penn State will get into the college football playoff, nor do I think they should get into the college football playoff with a 10-2 record, honestly.
I agree.
So I do think that these are two obviously very important games. But, yeah, if they win these next two games, I think they will be hosting a first-round playoff game.
And there's two different parts of what Pro Football Focus looks at. There's team grades and there's player grades, right? That's one part of it, because Indiana, according to those team grades, are actually the number one team overall. But the power ratings and Penn State's game grades are actually fairly consistent. They're number 6 in the power ratings, and they're number 7. They're tied 7th with Texas according to the team grades.
Yeah, definitely. And like I was telling you before, like there's a little bit of a difference between our power ratings and our team grades, and even my own personal top 25 that you can find at pff.com. So how I would kind of break it down for people is the grades that you could find in premium stats are basically how dominant or how good you were in that game without taking into account who your opponent was, right? Because you look at the team grades right now, Army is the number 3 team in the country because they've been
yes, they are.
But that doesn't mean they're actually the third best team in college football, right? I think that's kind of what I would say right there. The power ranking is a little bit different. That's basically how good we think that team is. We also take into account who they play as well. And that's just kind of ranking the teams based off like how good we think the team is as well. That's also not perfect though, because I don't even think it takes into account resume that much in terms of making a ranking. And in my own personal top 25 I put out, I try to do a little bit of both. But I really kind of favor the resume there and try to say, okay, who deserves to be ranked where they are, not really how good we think a team is right now. For example, like in the power ratings, BYU is number 29 in the power rating. So we think they're the 29th best team in college football as of right now. But I would say they deserve to be in the top 10 still because of what they've done this year in terms of the resume. So do I actually think BYU is the 8th best team in college football, like where I have them ranked? No. But I do think they have the 8th or so best resume in college football, which is why I have them ranked there. So it's a little bit different with everything you can get at PFF.com. You can see just how dominant a team's been in their game. Right. You can see how good we think a team is actually, like who would be favored on a field, basically what the power ratings would say. And then also we have my own personal top 25, which basically who deserves to be where they're ranked based off resume, in my opinion.
Where do you have Penn State currently? Your personal rankings.
Yeah, let me find that real quick. I think I had them 5.
Okay.
Early. So yeah, I had Penn State number 5 right now. So yeah, they're very safe. As long as they beat Minnesota and Maryland, they're going to be fine. But if they lose, I do think they're going to fall out of the top 12.
And I agree with that. I don't need to sit here as the Penn State podcast host and say, no, a 10-2 Penn State team and beat the same drum that Kirby Smart is saying, well, let Vegas decide it, or what would the line say against Penn State? And I disagree with that idea, because then why play the games? Speaking of games, this is the argument that I hear about for against Penn State, saying that, oh, their schedule is easy, West Virginia's no good, USC is no good, the ESPN analysts specifically Booger McFarland, right? We can name Booger McFarland on this show. That saying that Penn State struggled with UCLA. Okay, they didn't dominate them, but that was clearly a decisive victory. Sorry that the third and fourth string defense did not stop UCLA in the final 15 seconds from scoring a garbage time touchdown. I digress. But the point is that everyone uses Penn State's schedule against them, except the committee. The committee says, actually, Penn State and Pro Football Focus, to this point in time, as we have this conversation, going into Minnesota game and before Maryland, Penn State has the 10th toughest schedule to date, according to Pro Football Focus and those power ratings. And the committee looks at that too. Max, the difference that I say, why is Indiana ranked one spot behind Penn State? They're undefeated. They should be above them. We're splitting hairs, the difference between the fourth and the fifth team, but I think it's an interesting part of the conversation. Why is an undefeated Indiana team below a one-loss Penn State team? The difference is the fact that Penn State put itself out there, went on the road to West Virginia, and won decisively against a Power 4 team. I do not care that West Virginia is not living up to expectations. That is a Power 4 team. Who did Indiana beat week 2? Western Illinois. That is a bad FCS team versus, you at least open yourself up to a potential upset by going on the road to Morgantown, and the committee values that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just look at the PFF power ratings right now. Penn State's played the 10th hardest schedule. Like you said, Indiana's played the 98th hardest schedule. It's not even comparable, honestly, in terms of the schedules. And also, I would say Penn State's win over Illinois is more impressive than anything Indiana has done this year, in my opinion, either. I mean, Illinois right now is a top 25 team in college football, I would argue, and should be ranked in the top 25. So that's better than anything Indiana's done as well. They both played Washington, who's probably the next best team that either team has played this year. Both won pretty convincingly as well. So, yeah, I think Penn State losing by 7 to Ohio State, Indiana's favor to lose by much more than that to Ohio State this weekend. So if Indiana plays closer to Ohio State on the road in Columbus, then I would rank them above Penn State, honestly. Okay. But we have not seen them do that yet. So I think if that's kind of a big thing this weekend is that, hey, if they lose by 6 or fewer points, I probably would rank Indiana above Penn State because they proved it and also was on the road while Penn State played Ohio State at home. But if they lose by more, I mean, I think Penn State deserves to be ranked above Indiana, as I do. They deserve to be ranked above them right now, even with a loss right now, because I think losing by 7 to Ohio State really not that bad of a result, considering Ohio State's one of the best teams in America. And then, like I said, they beat Illinois this year. They also beat Washington. Like you said, they beat West Virginia. Indiana, I actually was looking at this earlier. They haven't beaten a single team this year that is probably going to finish with a 6-6 record, better than a 6-6 record. And that includes Western Illinois, right? So they've played bad teams the entire season. And yes, they're beating up on them. I'm not denying that's why they're the highest graded team in college football, because they're really just dominating every single game. But at the same time, they haven't really played a tough opponent until this weekend against Ohio State. So this is a really good test for Indiana to show just how legit they are.
Let's talk about the value of winning a Power 4 game, a conference game. Georgia's schedule's not easy. Georgia has one of the toughest strength of schedules. I know that Pro Football Focus has them 4th overall, but I constantly see West Virginia's bad. Penn State doesn't deserve any credit. Illinois is not that good. USC is down this year. They blew out Purdue. What does that tell us about anything? The committee, and I'm sure Pro Football Focus weighs it the same way. It's a Power 4 win. It's a road win. It's a conference win. Sure, there's a big difference between winning on the road against Purdue versus Minnesota. But when I compare, so Michigan State for Indiana, they won convincingly. And as far as I'm concerned, that was a road game. I can't see how the committee or Pro Football Focus would weigh that any differently from Penn State winning on the road at Wisconsin.
Yeah, honestly, and I would say Wisconsin's a much better team than Michigan State as well.
Yes, they are.
That's another thing too, is that hey, you just got to look at just how good these teams are. And yes, Power 4 matters, but you also so the PFF power ratings I think are so valuable to look at. How good is this team actually? For example, I think BYU got severely punished for losing to Kansas when they really shouldn't have been, in my opinion. Kansas, I know they're 4-6 right now.
The Andy Kotelnicki effect.
Yeah, but they're a top 35 team in the country according to PFF's power ratings right now, because they've lost so many close games. I think their 6 losses were by an average of 5 points. They beat Iowa State. as well. So, and they almost beat Kansas State. So Kansas is a pretty good team, honestly, and BYU lost to them in a very close game. They got really, really punished. I did not think they deserved to fall that far in the ranking like they did. So that's another thing too. Is you just got to look at how good these teams actually are. And Penn State, in terms of who they've beaten this year, is pretty a lot more impressive than I think what Indiana's done this year.
So there you have it. Eye test. Honestly, the numbers, the committee, it all aligns. Penn State is a secure college football playoff team. Now, Max and I obviously agree. If they lose to Minnesota or Maryland, this is not a college football playoff team. But the way that things have gone in the past and the way that they're trending, Penn State is firmly in that conversation, and I think is a sleeper contender to actually get to the championship, but we'll let that unfold there. But Penn State needs to get in first, and right now everything's setting up to be that way, including a potential blowout victory, the third consecutive one. I like the way that Penn State matches up against Minnesota. We'll talk about that more and what the numbers say on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars awarded in winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports acceptable to all. You just pick more than or less than on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. And Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance, an injury insurance policy so that your lineups will stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and does not return, Prize Picks will keep your lineup alive. Prize Picks has also invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out of your lineup if it isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks does not hit. Do you think Saquon Barkley will get more than or less than 95 rushing yards next week? Do you think George Pickens will get more than or less than 65 receiving yards? You can cook up your hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app. Use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that is Prize Picks. Run your game. And today's episode is also brought to you by Home Field Apparel. Hey, college football fans, postseason's almost here. The college football playoff is on the horizon, and to make sure you're ready, we partnered with Home Field, the exclusive apparel sponsor of our show, to bring you their Can't Miss Kickoff 2024 campaign. Home Field is a go-to for premium collegiate apparel, crafted with comfort in mind and featuring vintage designs that will make you the envy of any tailgate. With over 180 schools to choose from, including Penn State, there's something for every fan, and not just football. Basketball, hockey, wrestling, you've got it all. But the real MVP is the Home Field Platinum Football Box. This is your all-access pass to exclusive gear for the 2024 season with 3 never-before-seen items from your school, plus VIPs get even more. You get a special hat and the 2024 Platinum Pass for early access and discounts all season long. So don't wait, head over to homefieldapparel.com and gear up today. And we got a special promo code for you. WeAre24, that is WeAre24 for 15% off at checkout. So go to homefieldapparel.com, use promo code WeAre24 for 15% off your order. That's Home Field. Let's make this season unforgettable. Max, when I look at this game, I see another dominant victory for Penn State. Now, going on back-to-back road trips is not ideal for Penn State, but because I view them as a top 5 team. And I look at Minnesota, yes, they are stifling defensively. I respect the defense, and I think that this defense is underserved because this team doesn't play complementary football. If they had they're kind of like Michigan. If they had somewhat more of a competent offense, this team could be really good across the board. But when I look at Minnesota's offense, in yards per play, they're right there with Purdue. They're barely a top 100 offense in FBS out of give or take 130 teams. So Penn State having a top 10 defense and a top 15 offense going up against, a top 20 Minnesota defense and a top 100 Minnesota offense. I think this lines up for another blowout type of win for the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, it could. I think my final score is 30-17, Penn State winning. I do think this is much more likely for a Penn State loss than the Maryland game is. Obviously, Maryland is occurring at home, and Maryland's a much worse team than Minnesota, I would say. But I do think the key to the game is Penn State's pass rush again. I think this could look a lot like the Illinois game, where you have a quarterback in the Illinois game in Luke Altmaier, and you have a quarterback here in Max Brosmer, who's actually really good when kept clean. Brosmer has the 6th best passing grade in America when kept clean this year. He's 93rd, though, when he's under pressure. So that's definitely an area where Luke Altmaier also struggled, and Penn State was able to get pressure on him, and you saw they just completely shut down that Illinois offense. I think it's an opportunity to do the same thing here against the Minnesota offense, who also their pass protection is below average right now. They're 70th in terms of pressure rate allowed this year. They have an excellent left tackle in Ariante Ursary, who might be a top 20 pick in the NFL draft. But outside of that, the offensive line has kind of struggled this year. So Abdur Carter, the amazing defensive line Penn State has a really good chance to make a huge impact on this game. And if they get pressure on Max Brosmer, they should be in very, very good shape. But if they give him time back there, that's when it could get a little dicey for Penn State. So I think the pass rush for Penn State is going to be key to this game. I do think they have the advantage over Minnesota's offensive line. But like I said, Max Brosmer has been really, really good this year from a clean pocket. You can't give him many clean pockets on Saturday.
And that's what I said leading up throughout the week. My personal preview, talking to another Minnesota expert who covers the team thoroughly, that the offensive line is the key in this case for Minnesota because they have playmakers. I like Darius Taylor a lot. I think he could be a candidate to go into the transfer portal. That's a different conversation. But it feels like he is too good for Minnesota. Same thing with Daniel Jackson. Daniel Jackson at wide receiver. So that's the issue, is these guys don't have that split second, that extra bit of time to make a play, to break off of coverage, to allow Brosmer to go through his reads. If that was the case, then Minnesota might be a little more competent offensively. So that's why coaches say it starts in the trenches.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, that's the key to the game, honestly, is that if they give him time back there, he has a chance to have a pretty decent day against Penn State's defense. But if they don't, if they get him under pressure, like I said, it could look a lot like the Illinois game where, it was close early on, but the ultimate deciding factor was Illinois just could not do anything offensively. And I think if you put Max Brosmer under pressure a lot in this game, it could look a lot like that Illinois game, honestly. So that's the key to the game. Because like I said, he's one of the best in America when he's kept clean, and he's one of the worst when under pressure. And I think if Penn State's defensive line can dominate like they've done all year, that could be the key to the game.
And Penn State's getting organic pressure. They are able to get pressure with Abdul Carter, Denai Sutton, Zane Durant, and a combination of Devon J. Thomas and or Alonzo Ford, right? Though that front four, Tom Allen is not blitzing as much, and Manny Diaz is just Mr. Blitz happy. He will do that no matter where he goes. But why Tom Allen's defense looks so different and why they don't blitz a lot is because they don't have to. They get organic pressure with 4 or 5 guys, and that's why Penn State is able to devote more resources into coverage and just have more of a balanced defensive look. I want to flip it over, Max, to Penn State's offense versus Minnesota's defense, because Minnesota's defense has forced 20 turnovers in total. 16 of them are interceptions. And it's not just one safety, one cornerback that it's really comprised to. I think, 7 or 8 different players have an interception on this Minnesota defense, so it's kind of spread throughout. What are you seeing from Minnesota's defense that allows them to be this effective, especially in the turnover category, which also kind of makes me a little more critical of Minnesota's offense? If you're forcing that many turnovers defensively, why isn't the offense having a little more success? If you want to chime in on that, great. But what does Minnesota do so well effectively defensively to force that many turnovers?
Yeah, they've done a really good job of their run defense is outstanding. I think they're like top 20 in run defense grade. They're top 25 in coverage grade as well. And one avenue that I'm really keeping an eye on in this game is that Minnesota's done an amazing job against tight ends this year. Right now, when opponents target tight ends, they have the 5th lowest passer rating in the country against Minnesota. So Minnesota has allowed the 5th lowest passer rating in the country when tight ends are targeted. And it's not like they haven't played good tight ends this year, right? They played Colson Loveland at Michigan. They played Luke Lachey at Iowa, right? So they played some good tight ends. Now, I do think that Tyler Warren will present them obviously a new challenge there. But they've done a really good job of defending tight ends this year, which obviously if you stop the tight end in Penn State's offense, they struggle a little bit, right? So I think that's definitely a big key to the games. And Minnesota's done a really, really good job of taking away tight ends. And it's going to have to stay the same here, because if they do that, then all of a sudden you got to rely on a well below average group of receivers, in my opinion. And then you got to rely on a run game that's kind of come and go as well. Against a really good run D that Minnesota's got as well. So that's definitely another area too that Minnesota could make this more of a game than a lot of people can might think. Is that they've done a great job taking away tight ends, and that's obviously a major area that Penn State wants to work with offensively.
The Penn State's wide receivers, they're capable. They're not. Because I don't want to be overly critical of them. Penn State has Tyler Warren, they have Nicholas Singleton, they have Katron Allen, right? They have other assets in the offense that they can go to. But the wide receivers have definitely quieted down. Trey Wallace, really good game against West Virginia. You saw Amari Evans go for 100 yards. Liam Clifford go for 100 yards. And I get it, the UCLA and Penn State are obviously going to allow those kinds of numbers defensively. Minnesota, not so much. Can Trey Wallace have a better game here if Minnesota's attention is all focused on Tyler Warren?
Yeah, I think he can. I think if they're trying to, take away Tyler Warren, that obviously opens up other avenues for other receivers to shine. I think Trey Wallace is probably the guy I would look at first for that. But yeah, like I said, it's just been, again, underwhelming a lot this year. And I think that they're still missing that true difference maker in that receiving core right now. I think they have some nice complementary pieces in that receiving core. They're very lucky that they have maybe the best tight end in America and Tyler Warren, because if not, this receiving core will, again, really struggle this year. But yeah, I think they have some nice complementary pieces, and they're going to probably need one of those guys to step up and make a big difference in this game if Tyler Warren is not able to do anything against a really, really good defense against tight ends.
Penn State's offensive line continues to progressively get better, but Max, on the other side of this break, I want to address the ground game, the offensive line. How much better are they? And will they continue to get better down the stretch? And maybe, what does Minnesota pose as a challenge to that group? We'll talk about that on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by ZBiotics. ZBiotics Pre Alcohol Probiotic Drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into this toxic byproduct in the gut. It is this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Here's a step-by-step guide on how to use it. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. For the best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly, pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnCollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use code LockedOnCollege at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they will refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets. If you win that first $5 bet, the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. So it's that convenient. It's that simple. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And if we look over at FanDuel.com, the lines are available for Penn State versus Minnesota. The spread, Penn State is 11.5-point favorite. The money line is -490 for Penn State, plus 375 for Minnesota. The total is at 45.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com. And remember, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Penn State's offensive line has been good in pass protection. I think that's what they do well. There's limited criticism there, but run blocking, if it wasn't for Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen being as effective as they are, I think people would be a lot more critical and come down on Penn State's offensive line. Max, what have you seen from them lately? Because since Minnesota's secondary and pass defense as a whole is so disciplined, they force turnovers. Now, Drew Aller does not routinely turn the football over. But if you get into a situation where they're obvious passing downs, Drew Aller might throw an interception or two, and that will really keep Minnesota in this ball game. So the offensive line in the ground game, I haven't been wholly impressed by them all season. Nicholas Singleton has dealt with bumps and bruises. Katron Allen is still getting close to 100 yards, but it takes volume to really get him there. He's not breaking off extremely long runs consistently, and neither has Singleton. And I think just because Penn State's been able to effectively move the football, rely on some elite defense, that no one's really pointing and saying, okay, the ground game's not what it should be.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting call. I think they've done an all right job in run blocking this year. I think they're 43rd or something like the top 45 in run blocking grades.
They're better than last season.
Yeah, actually. It's not horrible. Not horrible. I still think Singleton's got to work on his vision a little bit. That's still an area he can improve at. So I think that might make the run blocking look a little bit worse than it actually is, honestly. And Katron Allen just really isn't that explosive of a running back. So when there is a hole there, he's not going to explode through it and get a lot of yards after it. But the run blocking has been all right. Pass blocking has actually been a little bit worse in terms of our grading system. It's the 78th in pass blocking grade right now. But against Minnesota, it's going to be interesting to see because, like I said, Minnesota's really, really good in run defense. But then the pass rushing has been about average this year so far. So there really isn't too much to get scared about pass rushing wise. They have a really good pass rusher in Ja Joyner, but he's not a very good run defender. But other than that, their run defense is really good overall, and their pass rushing is kind of average right now. So that's definitely an area that it's going to be interesting to watch, is seeing, hey, Penn State's average pass protection against an average pass rush, and then Minnesota's really good run defense going against Penn State's offensive line in the run game as well. So that's definitely another area to watch in the trenches. I know everyone's kind of talking about the Minnesota O-line, how they're going to hold up against Penn State's D-line, but also Penn State's O-line against a pretty solid Minnesota defensive line is going to be really interesting to watch as well.
Well, and that's why Minnesota forces teams to play into their strengths. The strength is pass defense, forcing turnovers, and if you can stop the run on the early downs But I feel like Minnesota's played a lot of undisciplined teams. That Maryland, like the tape against Maryland is just atrocious. I mean, that is a team that is prone to turnovers and why that result. But I also look at Minnesota, and they're coming off of a bye week. But before that, they lose to a pretty banged up Rutgers team. No Kyle Monangai either. And Ethan Kaliakmanis gets revenge and wins 26-19. So Minnesota is almost a Jekyll and Hyde type of team. And that's why I look at, okay, if Penn State plays discipline, if you don't give Minnesota 2-3 turnovers, you should win this game fairly convincingly. And if you can get 4 yards, 5 yards on first downs, especially, you don't play into Minnesota's strengths where they want you to pass the football. They really want you to pass the football because that's how the team operates. They need the turnover to really stay in these ball games.
Yeah, definitely. And I think their pass defense has been pretty good this year, but they did have their worst game this past week against Rutgers. Like you said, they had a 52.1. Yeah, 52.1 coverage grade is not very good, right? That's their worst of the season by a good bit, honestly. So if you're Penn State, you're kind of hoping that holds again this week, that the secondary struggles as much as they did against Rutgers this week. But I do think that's going to be interesting to see. And then, like I said, the run defense has been kind of consistently good all year for them, and then the coverage has been mostly really good, but they have had some bad games, though, in the past. Like against Michigan, they weren't great in coverage. Rutgers, they weren't great in coverage either. Those are two teams that really can't throw the football all that well. You're hoping with a guy like Drew Aller that you can really expose him a little bit more there. So they've had a really good coverage unit all year, but there has been some warts in some games. So if you're Penn State, you're kind of hoping that shows up again on Saturday.
And that's the point that I've made throughout the week is that, okay, Minnesota's secondary and pass defense is good, but they can't cover forever. So if Minnesota's defensive line is not getting organic pressure, and that's why I say, hey, Penn, and part of that is, so I'm glad you pointed out that, yes, Penn State's pass blocking might not be as good as I'm giving them credit for. Drew Aller's just also mobile within the pocket. He's not a statue. The some of the plays, the sacks that he avoided against Purdue, I mean, that when you look at, 0 sacks allowed, part of that's the offensive line. Part of that's Drew Aller just being shifty for someone who's 6'5" and 235 pounds.
Yeah, he's done a great job of being, a great pocket manipulator, honestly, right? His footwork in the pocket, I've been really impressed by. That was kind of an area of focus for him from last year. And he's obviously done that this year. And I think that's definitely a thing that, he's obviously not going to be the most mobile quarterback in the world. He can run, obviously, but he's like 240 pounds. But he's done a really good job stepping up in the pocket, helping out his offensive line. I think I've really been impressed by Drew Aller this year, and that's why I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL draft this upcoming cycle. Now, whether or not he declares is going to be another story, but that's going to be a really big part of this game as well. Because, like I said, Minnesota's pass rush has been probably the worst part of their entire defense this year. That's definitely, if they can get pressure on Drew Aller, he is one of the safest quarterbacks in the country. He's not going to turn the football over at all. He's not going to put the ball in harm's way. He will take what the defense gives him. And if Minnesota gives him time back there, he will certainly be able to find some open receivers.
That's an interesting topic, which I don't want to delve into here, but Drew Aller, I don't see how he passes up an opportunity because I think he goes in the first or the second round of next year's NFL draft on potential alone, but I get your point that he may return. We'll see at the end of the day. So those pass catchers, those targets that you mentioned, we'll finish with this, Max. Julian Fleming may not be available. He's been a player that is doing more things outside of the box score because his statistics aren't the best. They're not pretty. And people are starting to tell me, well, we don't need Julian Fleming. He wasn't at practice, at least the midweek practice. So will he play in this game? And he logged his lowest snap count against Purdue. Max, we mentioned Trey Wallace. Is there anybody else that I'm a huge fan of Tyseer Denmark per the eye test? The numbers aren't going to say anything, but the eye test says that this is an electrifying football player, all the potential in the world. Is this a game where just on potential alone, the data doesn't say, the data doesn't have a report on him, but is this somebody that you want to see in Penn State's game plan? I certainly do now that the red shirt isn't an issue anymore.
Yeah, obviously true freshman, right? He's been, like I said, I'm with you. I think he's shown some flashes this year, so I've actually been pretty excited by him as well. Because obviously Liam Clifford's always going to be out there. He's kind of a pretty reliable player for Penn State this year. Amari Evans could be stepping into a bigger role with if Fleming is out in this game. Tyler Johnson the same way, right? But I'm really been intrigued by what Tyseer Denmark has showed as well. I think it's a good call out to you, but I think that's a good point by Fleming, because Fleming has had a rough year receiving wise, but he has been a pretty good run blocker for Penn State this year. So that is an important part to the game that he brings. But I think if he's out though, a guy like Tyseer Denmark or Amari Evans will probably be getting an expanded role in the offense.
That is Max Chadwick of Pro Football Focused. He is the co-host of PFF's College Football Show. Links to his work will be down in the description. I encourage everyone to go check them out. Thank you so much for everyone tuning into this episode. Max, thanks so much for the time again and the perspective on Penn State's college football playoff hopes and Penn State versus Minnesota. It's always great to chat with you.
Of course. Thanks so much, Zach.
And again, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. Now, for your second listen and watch, check out Locked On Big Ten with host Craig Sheeman. Craig puts the Big Ten first when everyone else overlooks it. And recently with these playoff conversations, that holds up, and that is definitely more than accurate here. You can find Locked On Big Ten available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts with host Craig Sheeman. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.